Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, wherever you are. Welcome to a gloriously silly yet oddly important discussion about Dexter Morgan, our favourite blood-spatter expert who moonlights as a vigilante serial killer. Today, we're ranking a bunch of detectives, plucked from various TV shows, movies, anime, and even some downright bizarre crossovers, to see who'd stand a real chance at putting Dexter behind bars. Stick around until the end to find out who truly deserves the top spot. Let's have fun with this. And please, if any of you are hardcore fans of the detectives we're about to mention, hold your pitchforks until I'm done. Or, sharpen them in the comments. First up, at the very bottom of number 9, is the Scooby-Doo gang. They've unmasked more phony ghouls and con artists than I can count. Their standard MO is stumbling onto a creepy location, finding random clues, and eventually discovering that the monster is actually Old Man Jenkins in a rubber mask. Dexter isn't wearing any rubber mask. He's literally just a normal guy who does some seriously not normal stuff behind closed doors. If Mystery Inc. rolled into Miami, they'd probably be searching for a ghost that kidnaps criminals in the night or something equally cartoony. But they'd be baffled because Dex is too precise and doesn't leave behind all those convenient stray footprints or comedic props. Maybe Velma would notice a needle cap on the ground, and Fred would suspect foul play, but they'd probably get nowhere close to Dex's actual operation. I doubt Dex would even bother labeling them as threats unless they had enough evidence to blow his cover. And let's face it, these are well-meaning teens, plus one talking dog, so Dex likely wouldn't fit them into his code. Sorry, Scooby Gang, you might want to stick to amusement parks. At number 8, and still in the I really don't see this going well category, is Nancy Drew. She's the poster child for teenage detective brilliance, tackling everything from stolen heirlooms to spectral apparitions that always turn out to be some disgruntled neighbor in a costume. Now, this is a whole different league. Dexter is a serial killer with a forensics background, but let's not underestimate Nancy. She's scrappy, she's curious, and she's fearless. Traits that can be pretty dangerous in the world of Dexter Morgan. If Nancy heard rumors of a so-called Bay Harbor butcher, she'd probably hop on the next flight to Miami, armed with her magnifying glass and a polite smile. She'd dig into public records, interview witnesses, tail suspicious vehicles, and basically be a complete thorn in Dexter's side. But does her knack for unraveling smaller-scale mysteries translate to exposing a meticulous, code-following killer who's been evading local law enforcement for years? Hard to say. Nancy might spot some anomalies in Dexter's timeline, or notice that he always has the best insight to homicides he's investigating. She'd probably form a suspicion, but Dexter's no one-trick pony. If he realized she was onto him, he might consider removing her as a threat. Unless he can rationalize that Nancy, a teenage detective, doesn't truly fit his code because she's not an evildoer, just a meddling kid. In a best-case scenario, Nancy gets lucky and Dex slips up. Worst case, she ends up on a lonely boat ride. I can't see many middle ground endings for her. Hovering just above Nancy Drew at number 7 is Sean Spencer from Psych. He's not really psychic, but he's so hyper-observant that he might as well be. He'll notice a tiny coffee stain on your shirt and immediately deduce you visited that new cafe on 3rd Street because it's the only place in town using that brand of Colombian roast. Now imagine Sean in Miami, strolling right into one of Dexter's famously spotless kill rooms. Maybe Dex accidentally left a piece of lint behind, and Sean would say something like, "Gus, this lint is from a $400 sweatshirt exclusively sold at that one super bougie store on Ocean Drive. There's only one guy in Miami Metro who could afford that, so we have our culprit." Gus would roll his eyes, Juliet would be unimpressed, and Lassiter would probably threaten Sean with arrest for interfering. The real question is, can Sean actually prove anything in a way that sticks? Or does Dexter see him coming and slipping out the back door? My guess, Sean's observational skills would give him a major advantage in spotting Dexter's little mistakes, but building a solid court-ready case is a different beast. I'd stick Sean Spencer in the he'd sniff out Dex, but Dexter might wiggle free pile. He might come close, yet Dex has a way of cleaning up, both literally and figuratively, before anyone gets that smoking gun. Still, I'd pay good money to see those comedic run-ins. Scooting up a notch is Veronica Mars at number 6. She's an ingenious teenage private eye with a talent for hacking, infiltration, and sarcasm sharper than Dexter's scalpels. She's solved murder cases in Neptune, California, and taken on powerful local politicians, criminals, and twisted conspiracies. Dexter might initially dismiss her because she's young and possibly overshadowed by bigger names, but that underestimation can cost him big time. Imagine Veronica's father, Keith Mars, the ex-sheriff turned private investigator, stumbling on weird homicides reminiscent of the Bay Harbor Butcher. Veronica, never one to ignore a challenge, would dig into local PD files. She's a pro at hacking or borrowing passwords. Find suspicious anomalies in Dexter's forensic reports, and eventually go, "So you're telling me the only constant in all these hush-hush blood spatter findings is Dexter Morgan? That's too neat to be coincidence." The question is, can she survive a confrontation? She's been cornered by murderers before, but Dex is an entirely different beast. If she tried to gather official evidence, Dex might slip away or move on to another city. Still, I think Veronica could piece together enough info to blow his cover wide open if she was patient. Alright, I'm going to pause here for a quick request. If you're enjoying this tour through a crazy detective and serial killer matchup, trust me, I'm having a blast. Please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to the channel. It's free, it helps us grow, and it means I can keep making weird hypothetical mashups like this. So if you've already done it, thank you so much. If not, please consider it. Alright, enough of my shameless plug. Let's dive back in. Moving a little higher at number 5, we have William Somerset and David Mills from 7. Somerset is the wise old detective who loves reading, pays attention to detail, and tries to stay calm even when facing horrifying crime scenes. Mills is the hot-headed detective who charges in with guns blazing and emotions boiling. They manage to confront John Doe, but that story ended in a famously awful twist. Dexter's no John Doe. He's not staging kills around the 7 deadly sins. He's not sending cryptic messages to the cops. He's more about killing quietly, removing evidence, and making sure nobody draws a line to him. Somerset might notice that these missing criminals are a pattern. He'd probably do some reading, connect the dots, and suspect that the killer has a moral code. Meanwhile, Mills would be outraged at the brutality if he ever saw one of Dex's kill sites. The question is, do they close in on Dex, or does Dex see them as a threat first? Mills can be baited into making rash decisions, which might leave an opportunity for Dex to slip away. Somerset, on the other hand, might be patient enough to form a theory, but then struggle to find concrete proof. Let me know which detective would be the bigger problem for Dex. Slightly above them is Jack Crawford from the Hannibal universe at number 4. Jack has a knack for leading investigations and pushing his team to their limits, sometimes way beyond healthy boundaries. But if you took Jack out of the Hannibal universe and dropped him into Dexter's, would he succeed without Will Graham's special talents? He's experienced, but Dexter's cunning might still slip through the cracks unless Jack built a powerhouse team around him. A one-on-one scenario could easily turn into a near miss where Jack suspects Dex, but never gathers that final piece of evidence. And if Jack tries to physically confront Dex, well, Dex does have some impressive combat moves when cornered. Jack might find himself in the hospital or in a plastic-covered basement. Still, the interesting part is that Jack is relentless and not easily intimidated. He fought Hannibal toe-to-toe when push came to shove. Maybe he'd do the same with Dex if it came down to that. Another scenario for fan fiction archives, I guess. This next one at number 3 is L. Laet from Death Note. He's this quirky genius who practically lives on sugar, sits like a gargoyle, and cracks some of the toughest cases imaginable. He nearly outsmarted Light Yagami, who was literally using a supernatural notebook to kill people via heart attack. If criminals started vanishing, L would suspect some kind of pattern. He'd figure out that these are criminals who either escaped justice or got off on technicalities, and he'd wonder if somebody on the inside is picking them off. Then he'd start narrowing down suspects, focusing on people who work in law enforcement. Dexter might try to steer him away with misdirection, but L is notoriously persistent. He might set up some broadcast or fake scenario to see how Dexter reacts, like he did with Light. Now, some Death Note fans will argue that Light had the advantage of supernatural power, making it a more difficult puzzle. Dexter's just a mortal man, so maybe L would find him even faster. Others would say Dexter's kills leave less of a cosmic signature, making it harder for L to pick up on a global pattern. Tell me in the comments, because I know you Death Note fans have strong opinions about that one. Near the pinnacle of this ranking, at number 2, is none other than the Dark Knight himself, Batman. You might be thinking, this is ridiculous. Batman's in Gotham, Dexter's in Miami. But let's just pretend Dexter sets up shop in Gotham and starts quietly taking out petty criminals and maybe a few mob bosses. Sure, that might help the city's crime rate, but Batman's not going to pat Dex on the back for it. Batman is known as the world's greatest detective. And he has the resources of Wayne Enterprises, plus a never-ending supply of fancy gadgets. If there's a string of criminals found dead under suspiciously neat circumstances, Batman's going to connect those dots. He'll notice that these kills have no forced entry, minimal forensic evidence, and something about them just screams methodical. Before you know it, Batman will be perched on a rooftop, scanning the area with his thermal imaging doohickey, analyzing Dex's patterns, maybe even hacking into Miami Metro's files to read all the forensic reports on their suspiciously missing criminals. Eventually, Batman would narrow it down to Dexter. Let's be real. Dex is good, but he's not Riddler-level cryptic or Joker-level manipulative. Bruce Wayne has faced an entire rogues gallery of crazies, so Dex might actually be easier to handle in comparison. The real drama is how Batman chooses to confront him, since Dex isn't exactly a cackling lunatic, but more of a quiet vigilante who kills. That's a showdown I'd love to watch. Would Dex pull a disappearing act before Batman could throw the handcuffs on him? Possibly, but I think if we gave them enough time, Batman would definitely solve that mystery. But at the very top, drum roll please, is Sherlock Holmes, arguably the most iconic detective in literature. He can tell where you were born, what you ate for breakfast, and your favorite color just by looking at your shoes. Put him in modern times with an iPhone, and he might be unstoppable. Dexter is slick, but Sherlock's entire existence is based on noticing microscopic details that others would miss. If there's a wave of criminals disappearing under fishy circumstances, Sherlock would see that pattern. He'd realize that someone with a deep understanding of police procedures behind it. He'd interview Dex, observe his mannerisms, and probably notice suspicious lack of emotional cues when discussing gruesome murders. Maybe he'd catch Dex slip up by mentioning a detail that was never shared publicly. Once Sherlock's suspicion is locked onto Dex, it's basically a countdown to confrontation. Of course, Dex is no fool. He might try to sabotage evidence, spin false leads, or even consider whether Sherlock meets the code. But let's be real, Sherlock is definitely not a murderer or a scumbag, so Dex would either have to run or risk being unmasked. I'm personally rooting for Sherlock in that scenario, but I know some Dexter fans believe he's cunning enough to outmaneuver even the great detective. Where do you stand? And that brings us to an honorable mention, the audience. We watch Dexter from the safety of our living rooms, binging episodes while shouting at the screen every time Dex nearly slips up. We're basically omniscient in that we see Dex's voiceovers, his secret stash of blood slides, his late-night boat rides, all that jazz. It's so easy to scream, how is everyone this clueless? But in the real world, we wouldn't see half of what Dex does. We just know him as the pleasant lab tech who offers us donuts in the morning. We'd assume all those criminals are either skipping town or winding up in some gang violence. So are we really that much smarter? Or do we have the advantage of being the TV audience? Probably the latter. Let's not pat ourselves on the back too much for seeing what other characters miss when we have literal behind-the-scenes access. If we tried to testify in court, we'd sound like we were describing a TV show, because, well, we are. Anyway, that's my totally non-definitive, definitely debatable list of who might catch Dexter Morgan. Until next time, stay curious, stay safe, and keep that forensic eye on high alert. You never know when someone quiet and unassuming might be harboring a darker hobby than you'd ever suspect. And if you see any suspicious plastic wrap in your neighbor's trunk, well, maybe call the authorities. Or maybe call Sherlock, or Batman, or you know what, maybe just mind your own business. Nobody wants to end up on a kill table. Thanks for hanging out with me. I'll catch you all in the next one.